Hello, welcome back to World History Distance from a Learning. Today we are enjoying the weather, we're out on the porch, got my dog, so if you can hear birds chirping in the background, I don't own birds, they're just outside. So ignore them if you can. Alright, today we are getting into World War II. So, last week, what were we talking about again? Well, we saw that there were many different revolution movements happening around the world. Mexico gains its independence. The colonies are starting to fight back, like India, different parts of Asia, and Egypt gains its independence. And we start to see this mistrust between the Middle East and Western culture. Western culture being Western Europe, the United States, those kind of ideas. We see political and economic growth and decline in Western Europe and the US. So we talked about some of those big movements like suffrage, the legalization of alcohol. But then we also see we go through the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and these are widespread economic measures that end up affecting the rest of the world. So the United States isn't able to help give loans to Germany anymore. So Germany is starting to face some major issues, right? Part of the reason why Hitler came to power is because of that unemployment issue. We also see the rise of totalitarianism, where we have Italy, Germany, and the Soviet Union, previously known as Russia during this time, where they are electing new leaders in order to try to help unemployment, restructure their government in order to help come out of this Great Depression era. And so we're starting to see that movement towards getting into World War II. So, getting into this week, first we're going to start with taking a look at those three new leaders. Again, they had some pretty radical ideas about how governments should be structured. Well, how do they continue to get that power? Okay, so taking a look first at Japan. So Tojo Hideki ends up overrunning parts of China. Okay, so if you remember, China was going into a civil war and Japan started to invade. We hear about the overrunning of the city of Nanjing. So they're overtaking parts of China and Korea. The League of Nations, previously set up from World War I, starts to condemn their actions, but League of Nations doesn't really have any power. They can't really do much other than just saying, hey, stop doing that. And so Japan, upset, doesn't really care. They leave that agreement of League of Nations. Italy is where we have our Mussolini. Okay, so he's also going out and expanding his country as well. He is invading and ends up conquering Ethiopia. So with Mussolini going into Ethiopia, the League of Nations does condemn, again, like they did with Japan earlier, the actions of going in and invading this country. But again, they have no power. They can't send an army to go and fight them. They can't really take away their money or get rid of the leaders. So Ethiopia unfortunately falls to the control of Italy. Germany, who is now under the control of Hitler, going through restructuring of their own government. Well, Hitler's doing a lot during this time to break the different agreements that Germany had under the Treaty of Versailles. That was the treaty from the Paris Peace Conference at the end of World War I. So some of the things that Hitler ends up doing that violates that treaty is building up the military power. So he's getting more soldiers again. He's getting more weapons. He's moving troops into Rhineland, France, which was previously a part of Germany. Okay, so Rhineland was a part of Germany, but under the Treaty of Versailles, that territory was taken away as a way to punish Germany. So going back in, expanding their territory again. We also see that they invade Austria and Czechoslovakia. Now, when we say invades, you have to understand there were people in these parts of Austria and Czechoslovakia that agreed with Hitler coming in. They saw that unemployment was at an all time low, and the whole entire world was struggling from the Great Depression. So there were sympathizers with Hitler coming in. So just keep that in mind. So when Hitler was invading these different parts, as well as Mussolini, what is the rest of the world doing and why isn't there any action taken? Well, this is when we hear that term appeasement coming in, where people were so afraid of going to war again that they were okay with not taking any action. They were okay with not sending troops to reinforce um, and control these actions. And this is a huge issue. So think of it this way. Say you're in the hallway at school and you see someone getting picked on and you see someone getting bullied, but you think to yourself, well, I'm not really a part of that, or I don't want to ruffle the waters, and so you just keep walking by. Well, that bully could keep getting worse and worse to the point of something bad happening or someone getting hurt. You took that option of appeasement. Okay, now put that on a worldwide level. This is essentially what happened and what allowed Germany, Italy, and Japan to expand to the point that they did. So you have to think, where's the rest of the world also in this? What's going on and why aren't they sending troops in? Well, taking a look at Western Europe and the United States, they were wiped out from World War I and the depression that they were all going through. They didn't have resources, they didn't have money, and they just didn't have the need or energy to get involved with a major world war again. So kind of again, avoiding that tension that was rising up from these major totalitarian states. They were low on resources, so they didn't have the men, didn't have the military weapons because it had just gotten wiped out again from World War I. Okay, and you have to think, some people did agree with Germany's actions of breaking that treaty because some people did think that the agreements were too harsh. The fact that they had to pay back billions and today trillions worth of reparation payments, that they had all of their industry cities taken away from them. All of these different things. Some people were like, yeah, that was too much. We don't blame Germany for wanting to retaliate against some of that. And they also believed, hey, what Hitler's doing isn't as bad as Soviet and communism, right? A lot of people were super scared of communism coming out of World War I. So if it wasn't communism, it may not be that bad, okay? I'm not saying that, but just know that that was some of the ideas coming out of World War I and why people weren't ready to jump into a second world war. So, how do things officially get started off? How do we start to see some of these official movement and dates coming into play with getting into World War I? Well, on August 1939, we have Hitler. Obviously, Germany, the country, is announcing a pact with Stalin, who's in control of the Soviet Union, where they're agreeing not to fight each other and they agree to divide up Poland if they do end up mobilizing their forces. September 1st, 1939, we officially have Germany invading Poland. Okay, so they mobilized thousands of troops, crossed into the border, and started to take over different territories, different cities, and people were scared or they didn't have a way to fight off these marching soldiers, these marching troops, and so Germany was easily able to come into Poland on that day. So 2 days later, France and Britain declare war on Germany for their actions of invading Poland. This date of September 1st, 1939, a lot of people see this as the official start of World War II. Okay, so again, we have an act of aggression and then allies officially declaring war against one another. So, World War I, starting here. Now, the Axis powers, this is the group that is made up of Germany, Italy, and Japan. and a little bit of Russia, but we'll see that later on kind of falling apart. The Axis powers end up starting to invade other regions of Europe and really bumping up their industrialization, militarism, all of that. Okay, so while the Nazis are invading Poland from the left, the Soviet Union, Stalin, is invading from the right. And what ends up happening is they divide up Poland within a matter of months. Okay? So within 1 month, Poland was split up completely. Okay? Hitler launches what's known as a blitzkrieg against Belgium and France. What is a blitzkrieg? That's another term that sometimes you'll hear used in historical reference, which is a continuous air raid and bombing while using ground forces to gain land. So they would send these airplanes, these major aircrafts with bombs attached to them, and they would fly over big cities where there's a lot of population, a lot of factories, and they would try to destroy them. And this is continuous, right? So day after day after day after day, and multiple bombs all in one night. We also have the actions of Dunkirk, where German forces expanded so far into France that English troops and French troops were pushed all the way up to the sea border, up to the English Channel. And it got to the point where they needed to get off of the mainland of Europe now. Otherwise, they were going to be killed. And this is a really awesome moment in history. If you haven't seen the movie, recommend watching it. But basically, English boats, civilian, military, all cross the English Channel in order to rescue the thousands of troops that were on land. This was a huge, huge moment in history because you have these little fishing boats going hundreds of miles across the English Channel into rough waters, rough weather, in order to have that hero moment to rescue these different soldiers. So, really awesome moment. Okay. We also see Hitler launch Operation Sea Lion, where he's using that tactic of blitzkrieg, and he's using it specifically against London. Okay, so London was the main camp. Obviously, it's where the Queen of England is residing, and all of those major military officers are organizing in London, and he just attacks. 54 continuous nights of bombing across military sites and London. So this is civilians now. These are attacks on civilians, and that was a huge, huge reason why England and France were so willing to bump up their own military forces, is because now we have Hitler attacking civilians who don't play a part in what's been happening. Okay, so here we've got pictures of the invasion of Poland, so you can see the different forces. You could see maybe why civilians didn't want to fight back against these troops that were coming into their cities, their towns. And then you see here the bombings of London. So you can see cities were just destroyed. Okay, churches, places of business gone. And what people would do is they practiced, and they understood that when the sirens started to go off, you go underground. And so many times people were sleeping in the tunnels where the trains were. And even today, when you go into London, there are scars on the buildings where you can see the destruction that is still left behind. And these are centuries old buildings. London is a very, very old city. And the fact that some of the buildings survived this blitzkrieg or Operation Sea Lion is just amazing. And people really try to protect those buildings still today. Okay, so by 1941, remember they invaded Poland in 1939. 2 years later, by 1941, the Axis powers and their allies controlled most of Europe. So they were able to expand their military forces and take over a lot of different parts of Europe very, very quickly. In June of 1941, Hitler ends up turning on Stalin and invades the Soviet Union, which that was really easy to do. If you remember last week or the week before, we were talking about the reorganization of different government systems in countries, and Stalin went through and was executing a lot of the top government officials if he found that they were not in his camp. And so it was really easy to turn on the Soviet Union and take over their government because they didn't have a ton of high controlling government officials. Hitler also is starting to begin his final solution. Now, with the final solution, this is where he was taking Jews and putting them into ghettos. He was also forcing them, with the Nuremberg laws that I talked about last week, forcing them to have certain jobs, to identify themselves as Jews, and we also see him shipping out Jews to prison camps, concentration camps, and this is the Holocaust. I wish that we could spend much, much more time on it, but unfortunately we just can't this year with the situation that we have. Next year, hopefully, our U.S. history teachers will get a chance to put a spotlight on the situations that occurred with the Holocaust. I would completely recommend you looking up the Holocaust. World War II Museum website has a lot of great resources about this, a lot of great firsthand accounts. Okay, but please just know this is one of the worst human atrocities that ever happened in our history. By 1945, some 6 million Jews, or 2/3 of all European Jews, were murdered. A lot of people didn't know the statistics or the complete picture of what happened until the end of the war. So a lot of the stuff happened behind the scenes. A lot of citizens didn't even know that this was happening because, again, they weren't seeing it. It wasn't being reported. So while all of these atrocities are happening, where's the U.S.? Why aren't we getting involved with the stuff? Well, President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was claiming neutrality. Again, the U.S. did not want to get involved with these things. They were dealing with their own issues. We were still working through the Great Depression and all of the fallout from that. What did happen with the U.S. kind of starting to get involved was that while Japan was invading all of these different parts of Asia, the U.S. didn't agree with it. So as a way to punish Japan or condemn their actions without officially declaring war, the United States started to ban the sale of war materials to Japan. Now, Hideki saw this as an act of aggression, as the U.S. taking a stance on Axis or Allied forces, and in retaliation against this banning of war materials, we see the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is known as a day which will live in infamy. It's a very famous quote from FDR after the attack of Pearl Harbor. Now, the attack of Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack from Japan on a United States base in the Pacific Ocean, on the Hawaiian Islands, and the attack happened in the morning of December 7th, 1941. This was the first attack on U.S. soil by an outside force since the War of 1812 between Britain and the United States. So it's been easily over 100 years since the United States has had anyone come onto their territory and kill their civilians on our soil. Because of the attack, we have over 2,400 dead, and on December 11th, Germany and Italy also end up declaring war on the United States. Okay, so this is when the U.S. finally gets involved with World War II. So you got some images here just to show you what had happened on that day. we don't see another act of aggression or terrorist movement from another country on US soil until September 11th, 2001. Okay, so pretty big moment in US history. To this point today, there are memorials set up along the coast and in the waterways of Pearl Harbor base. So here on the bottom right, you see the Pearl Harbor Memorial there set up. Okay, so a lot of people still take this day with pride and remember troops or World War II veterans on this day. All right, so this is all that I have for you guys this week as far as the video. Make sure you guys are asking questions of your teachers, that you're thinking about some of those cause and effects. How could the actions from the beginning affect the actions at the end? How do we still see some of the repercussions or thoughts about even Germany today? How do we view Germany? How could that relate to some of the actions that were taken during the beginning of World War II? So I hope you guys have a good week. We'll see you later.